As you mentioned, I came of an intellectual age as a Marxist Leninist, very much involved in the Iranian Revolution.
I mean, I knew half of these students who took over American Embassy. They were from my campus. I knew at least half of them. The entire leadership position of that, I knew personally. And their understanding was that they wanted to interrupt any American attempt to launch a coup after the revolution. That was their understanding. They wanted to go in there and get out after a couple of days, and to show Americans that, okay, we know what you're up to, you know. And of course, they go in there, things get totally out of hand. They see all these shredding documents, they see all these things, and then immediately, you know, the Revolutionary Council takes over, and then it turns into the hostage crisis, which was totally unintended consequence of the embassy attack.
For more than 40 years, successive American governments have imposed different kinds of sanctions against Iran. While justification for these sanctions have changed, sanctions themselves have remained constant. Time has come to release Iranian people from these draconian measures that have produced inside the country nothing but heightened hostilities, corruption on the top, and misery for millions at the bottom. Sanctions are wars by other means. Sanctions undermine the livelihood of ordinary people.
The framing of Iran as the malign actor, as a force to fear in the Middle East, is the basic drive of American policy. And I think many years ago, when I gave a talk at Washington University in St. Louis with the invitation of Professor Keshavarz, the title of my talk was Manufactured Crisis. In Iran nuclear deal is a manufactured crisis. The world does not need to worry about Iran's access to nuclear technology and nuclear arms race. Why should Gulf states be afraid of Iran? Does Iran have any ambitions to invade Gulf states? Does Iran has any ambitions to invade Saudi Arabia or attack Saudi Arabia? The answer is very, very categorical no. Iran is not about dominion abroad. It's about security inside. And I think if the US follows that line, we have a very, very different picture of the Middle East. One of the big myths about the Iranian political system is that the supreme leader makes decisions and everybody else is irrelevant. And actually the reality is that the conflict and contradiction between different factions in political power in Iran is even much deeper than the conflict that exists between the Republicans and Democrats in the US. One of my good friends who is very close to Khatami, and with the Arab neighbors, I think Iran is invested and quite interested in a normalized relation. And I think on the both sides, I think that what is important from the Iranian position, standpoint, a comprehensive non-interference agreement. And this has been on the table for a long time. They come and talk about it, and then they go and forget about it. But this is, I think, the most important issue, that both sides advance their foreign policy by interfering in their domestic affairs. And if that comprehensive agreement happens, and I think there is a very strong impetus on the Iranian side, as well as on the, I have to say, the Gulf states, to reach such an agreement. And the same agreement, I think, is also true for Iran and the US, the non-interference. Those prisoners and those guards
they were also the product of a particular historical circumstance. And if you look at around the world, different revolutions, we see that the same guards at that moment in Iran could have been the prisoners in a different moment, in a different place. A relatively strong popular support. And as you said, it fluctuates. In the last 40 years or so, sometimes we see like the level of participation in electoral politics in Iran goes all the way up to 80%, sometimes goes down to 50%, 45%. Of course, with America, we are sitting in the Midwest now. With American standards, 50% is
very high.
success.
Yes.
But in Iranian standard, 50% is a big defeat. And I think it's also a myth that people in the rural areas are supporting the current regime. There are great numbers of people in the big cities, in Tehran, in Isfahan, in Mashhad, Tabriz, who support this regime for many different reasons. The ruling government is very pluralistic. I mean, often people refer to the Iranian government as a totalitarian regime. That's another misunderstanding of how Iranian government operates. Iranian government is not a totalitarian regime because it's so pluralistic inside its own governing body. If you ask me today that what can replace the Islamic Republic, I have no idea, except to think that it might fall into a series of sort of regional wars, civil wars, because the Islamic Republic at this moment still enjoys a respectable level of popular support. And at least 20, 25, 30% of population are politically and ideologically committed to this regime. I don't think those people are going to disappear.
I was invited to a book conversation at the Iranian National Archive and Library a couple of weeks ago. And when people say that now women in Iran are the subject of this repressive patriarchal system, they don't even actually, I don't care about those indicators, but I brought them up to say that you don't care about your own indicators. You know, if you say that this is what happens, but look at your own indicator. It's always interesting. I was on the panel that I mentioned this. I said that when people talk about women's situation around the world, they always refer to these indicators: infant mortality, life expectancy, education, and so employments, and so on. So the moment they get to Iran, they say that it's hijab. It's like, so let's be consistent there. If you are interested in one of the big issues that historians of the Iranian Revolution always talk about is how Khomeini's leadership actually was based on the suppression of these kind of differences. And they always mention this, that Khomeini always, in his sermons and political speeches, he always talked about wahdat kalame, the unity of our words. And I always say that this is an interesting kind of concept that if someone is talking about unity of our words, in a sense, that also is an implicit and possibly explicit acknowledgement of difference. I mean, if you are not thinking about differences, why would you emphasize so much that we have to have a unity of our differences?